The Sunken Garden at Kensington Palace is not a place where history is supposed to change. It is a place where history is remembered quietly, carefully, with the kind of reverence that the British royal family has perfected over centuries. The flowers are planted in specific shades of white cream and soft pink, colors chosen not at random, but to echo the wardrobe of the woman memorialized at its center. The pathways are maintained with precision. The statue of Diana, Princess of Wales, has stood at its heart since the summer of 2021. Surrounded by 3 bronze children, her arms outstretched, her gaze fixed on something just beyond the present moment. It is a place of pilgrimage for thousands who still leave flowers, letters, and photographs. On the morning of July 1st, 2026, what would have been Diana's 65th birthday, something happened in that garden that no one had planned for. No statement was issued. No photographer was briefed. No line appeared in the court circular. There was no toast, no reissued photograph, no carefully worded tribute from the palace press office. But by the end of the day, the entire country was talking about it. News channels interrupted their regular programming. Social media platforms were flooded with tearful emojis and childhood photographs of the people's princess. And the person responsible for this nationwide outpouring of grief and love was not a king, not a prime minister, not a diplomat or a dignitary. It was an 8-year-old boy who had never met his grandmother, who had only ever known her through fading photographs and whispered stories, and who decided on his own that she deserved to be remembered. This is the story of what Prince Louis did, and why it left Britain in tears. To understand what happened on that Wednesday morning in July, you have to understand the weight of the date itself. And to understand the weight of the date, you have to go back further than 1997, further than the divorce, further than the fairy tale wedding. July 1st has always been complicated for the royal family. It is the birthday of Diana Frances Spencer, born in 1961 at Park House on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. She was the 4th of 5 children, born into aristocracy, but into a family marked by its own quiet turbulence. Her parents' marriage was strained. Her mother, Frances, left when Diana was just 6 years old, walking out of the family home and triggering a custody battle that would dominate Diana's early childhood. That wound, the wound of abandonment of a mother who left, never fully healed. It shaped Diana's fierce protectiveness over her own sons decades later. Diana grew up with a deep sensitivity to the pain of others. She understood what it felt like to be unseen, to be overlooked, to be trapped in a world where appearances mattered more than feelings. That empathy would become her defining characteristic, the quality that would eventually make her the most beloved woman on earth. She was 20 years old when she married the Prince of Wales in 1981. The world watched in awe as she walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral, her ivory silk taffeta dress trailing behind her, her bouquet held tightly in hands that trembled slightly. She was young. She was beautiful, and she was walking into an institution that had no idea how to contain her. The marriage, as the world now knows, was not a fairy tale. It was a slow unraveling of trust, of affection, of the illusion that royalty could somehow be immune to the ordinary heartbreaks of ordinary life. By the time Diana and Charles separated in 1992, the cracks were impossible to ignore. By 1996, the marriage was over. And by 1997, Diana was gone, taken in a car crash in Paris that the world still struggles to process. July 1st became a day of quiet reflection. For the royal family, it was a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. For the public, it was a day to remember everything that had been lost. The palace has never known quite how to handle Diana's memory. She was too beloved to ignore, too complicated to fully embrace, too present in the public imagination to ever truly fade. The statue in the Sunken Garden was unveiled on what would have been her 60th birthday, a joint project by her 2 sons, William and Harry, who stood together that day despite the fractures that would later widen between them. It was meant to be a permanent tribute, a place where the public could come and remember the people's princess. The inscription on the plinth reads, "May you dance in the wind, forever young and forever beautiful." But for the family themselves, the garden has always been more private than public, a place for quiet reflection, a place where the weight of memory can be carried alone. And on July 1st, 2026, it became the setting for something no one expected. The morning of July 1st began like any other at Kensington Palace. Staff went about their routines. The gardeners tended to the flowers, including, as it happened, a sprig of myrtle that had been carefully preserved from the original bush that supplied Diana's wedding bouquet 45 years earlier. The myrtle tradition is one of the oldest in royal weddings, a symbol of hope and continuity that has survived largely unnoticed into the modern era. But no one had scheduled anything for July 1st. No official tribute had been planned. The date usually passes the way it always has since 1996. In silence, unmentioned, treated by the family as a private matter that ended badly and stayed that way. Then, just before noon, a small figure appeared in the garden. Prince Louis, the youngest child of the Prince and Princess of Wales, had turned 8 on April 23rd. By all accounts, he is a lively, curious boy, the kind of child who asks questions that adults have long stopped asking, who sees the world not as it is, but as it could be. He has been photographed over the years making funny faces at Trooping the Color, sticking out his tongue at the crowds, waving with unrestrained enthusiasm. But behind that mischievous exterior is a child who is deeply observant, who watches his parents carefully, who absorbs the emotional temperature of the room without anyone noticing. He had been photographed earlier in the year at Trooping the Color, wearing a pale blue tie that matched his mother's dress, a subtle nod to Diana, who had worn a similar outfit to an Easter service in 1987. The family had been thinking about Diana in the weeks leading up to her birthday. Kate had worn a powder blue Catherine Walker coat dress that closely resembled one of Diana's most iconic looks. George and Louis had worn matching blue ties. These were small, deliberate choices, the kind of quiet acknowledgement that the palace does not announce but that royal watchers always notice. But what Louis did on July 1st was not coordinated. It was not approved by the press office. It was not part of any official plan. In fact, according to sources close to the household, nobody in the press office had been told to expect anything at all that day. According to those same sources, Louis had been asking questions about his grandmother for weeks. It had started with a photograph, a black and white image of Diana laughing in the garden at Highgrove House, her arms wrapped around a young William. Louis had found it in a book at Kensington Palace and had asked his father who the woman was. William, according to the account, did not simply answer the question. He sat down with his son and told him stories about Diana's kindness, about her visits to hospitals and homeless shelters, about the way she could walk into a room full of strangers and make them feel like they were the only people in the world. He told Louis that she was the best grandmother he could have ever had, and Louis, like any child, wanted to know more. He wanted to see her. He wanted to meet her. And when he was told that she was no longer here, that she had gone to somewhere he couldn't follow, he did what children do when they love someone they cannot touch. He found a way to reach her anyway. On the morning of her 65th birthday, he walked into the Sunken garden alone, or as alone as any royal child can be, with a single protection officer keeping a respectful distance. He approached the statue of Diana, the bronze figure surrounded by 3 children, and he did something that no one had told him to do. He knelt at its base. For less than a minute, he remained there, his small frame barely visible against the weathered stone. Witnesses later said he appeared to be speaking, though no one could hear what he said. His lips moved. His hands rested on the bronze feet of the statue. And then, according to those same sources, he pressed something into the soil at the statue's base. Something small, something green, something that had been carefully wrapped and carried in his pocket. It was a sprig of myrtle, the same flower that Diana had carried in her bouquet on her wedding day. The same flower that has linked royal brides for generations, from Queen Victoria's eldest daughter to Catherine herself. The same flower that, in a sense, connects the past to the present, the living to the lost. Louis stood, said nothing that anyone recorded, and left the way he came. The gesture might have gone unnoticed. It might have remained a private moment between a boy and the grandmother he never knew, a secret kept within the walls of Kensington Palace. But someone did notice, and within hours, the detail reached the press. Hello magazine was the first to report it, citing a source close to the household. Then the Daily Mail followed, with a front-page headline that simply read, "Louis's tearful tribute to Granny Diana." Then every major news outlet in Britain picked it up. The story spread not because it was scandalous, not because it revealed any secret, but because it was so deeply, profoundly human. An 8-year-old boy, kneeling at a statue, pressing a flower into the soil. It should not have been news. And yet it was, because it spoke to something that the royal family has spent decades struggling to articulate, that grief does not follow protocol, that love does not require permission, that memory, when it is real, does not need a press release. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. On Twitter, the hashtag Lewis Remember Diana trended for hours. Users shared side-by-side photographs of Diana, holding a young William and Louis at the same age, kneeling at the statue. One user wrote, "Diana would have been so proud of her grandchildren. She raised William right, and he is raising his children right." Another posted, "I cried when I saw this. A child who never met his grandmother decided to honor her on his own. That's not duty. That's love." Newspaper columns were written. Television presenters choked up on air. Even the usually reserved BBC anchors found themselves struggling to maintain their composure as they relayed the details of Lewis's visit. It was not just a royal story. It was a story about family, about memory, about the way love transcends death. For William, the moment was particularly powerful. He has always been protective of his mother's memory, careful about how she is discussed, deliberate in how he introduces her to his children. He has spoken in rare interviews about the importance of keeping her alive for George, Charlotte, and Louis, of telling them stories, of showing them photographs, of ensuring that they know who she was. He once described the pain of knowing his children would never meet her, saying, "It's a gap in their lives that I feel every day." But he has also been cautious. The pain of losing her at 15 never really goes away. It changes shape, it recedes, but it never disappears. And watching his youngest son kneel at her statue, without being asked, without being instructed, that was something else entirely. It was not just a gesture. It was a confirmation, a sign that Diana's spirit was somehow still present, still guiding, still shaping the family she had left behind. According to a source who spoke to the Daily Mail, William was told about Lewis's visit later that day. He did not say much when he heard it. He asked one question, about exactly where at the statue's base the myrtle had been left, and then said nothing else on the subject for the rest of the day. But what he did instead was telling. He cleared an appointment that had been on his diary for weeks and went to the Sunken garden himself that evening. He stood by the statue for several minutes, his hands in his coat pockets, looking down at the patch of soil where his son had left the flower. No statement was issued. No photographer was briefed. The only record of the visit came from staff who happened to be tending the garden that evening, and who described a man standing still for longer than the visit strictly required. And then there was Charles. The king was told the following morning before his official engagements began. According to a source who spoke to the Daily Mail, he did not say much when he heard it. He asked one question about exactly where at the statue's base the myrtle had been left, and then said nothing else on the subject for the rest of the day. What he did instead was clear one appointment that had been on his diary for weeks and go to the Sunken garden himself, alone except for a single protection officer, on the morning of July 1st. That sounds small. A king standing by a statue for a few minutes before breakfast. It wasn't. Charles has never been photographed at his former wife's memorial since it was unveiled in 2021. Not on an anniversary, not on her birthday, not once in 5 years. Camilla was not there. No statement was issued. The only record of the visit at all came from staff who happened to be tending the same garden that day and who described a man standing still for longer than the visit strictly required. 3 generations, arriving separately, driven by the same instinct, none of them waiting for the other two to go first. What Louis did on July 1st was not just a personal gesture. It was a political act. Not in the sense of partisanship or policy, but in the deeper sense of what it means to be part of an institution that is struggling to reconcile its past with its present. The royal family has always been defined by tradition. Continuity is its foundation. The monarch does not change the institution. The institution changes the monarch. But Diana changed everything. She brought emotion into a system that had spent centuries suppressing it. She showed that the crown could be human, could be vulnerable, could be loved not because of what it represented, but because of who it contained. She broke the unspoken rule that royalty must remain distant, untouchable above the fray of ordinary human feeling. And when she died, the institution did not know how to process her. They tried silence. They tried distance. They tried to move on as if she had never been there. But the public never forgot. And neither, it turns out, did her grandchildren. Lewis's gesture was significant not because it was grand, but because it was small. It was not a renamed garden. It was not an official portrait. It was not a speech or a statement or a carefully managed photo opportunity. It was a child, acting on instinct, doing what children do when they love someone. They find a way to show it. There was no palace official standing in the background, no PR strategist plotting the optics, no media handler briefing the press in advance. It was organic, unscripted, and utterly devoid of calculation. The myrtle, too, carried layers of meaning that the palace has spent years trying to avoid. It was a flower of Diana's wedding, a wedding that ended in divorce, that was followed by scandal and separation and finally tragedy. The palace has never known what to do with that legacy. They have tried to honor Diana without acknowledging the marriage that defined her public life. They have tried to remember her without dwelling on the pain. But Lewis, in his innocence, found a way to bridge that gap. He took the flower of the wedding and placed it at the feet of the memorial. He connected the two halves of Diana's story, the fairy tale and the tragedy. In doing so, he made them whole. Royal historian Hugo Vickers has written extensively about the myrtle tradition, noting that it is one of the few pieces of wedding ritual to survive largely unnoticed into modern era, overshadowed by tiaras and headlines, but unbroken since Victoria's day, regardless of how any individual marriage turned out. The myrtle bush at Osborne House, from which Diana's sprig was originally taken, is still growing today. It has supplied cuttings for every royal bride since 1858. Catherine carried myrtle in her bouquet in 2011. Meghan carried it in 2018. And now, a sprig from that same lineage has been pressed into the soil at the feet of Diana's statue. The symbolism is almost too perfect to be real. A flower that began as a symbol of marital hope, passed down through generations, ending up as a tribute to a woman whose marriage failed but whose legacy endured. The reaction from the public suggested that this was what they had been waiting for. Not a grand statement, not a political maneuver, just a simple, honest acknowledgement that Diana mattered, that she was loved, that she had not been forgotten. It was as if Lewis had given the nation permission to grieve openly, to remember openly, to love Diana without the constraints of protocol. The gesture also revealed something about the next generation of the royal family. George, Charlotte, and Louis are growing up in a very different world than their father did. They are being raised with more openness, more emotional honesty, more willingness to engage with the complexities of their family's history. William and Kate have made a conscious effort to ensure that their children know who Diana was. They talk about her. They show them photographs. They encourage them to ask questions. And they have allowed them, in their own way, to build a relationship with a grandmother they never met. This is a stark contrast to the way Charles and Diana raised William and Harry, surrounded by privilege but also by the unspoken tensions of a crumbling marriage, protected from the media but isolated from the emotional support they desperately needed. But Lewis's gesture went beyond what his parents had planned. It was not orchestrated. It was not part of a strategy. It was a child, acting on his own, deciding that his grandmother deserved to be remembered on her birthday. And that spontaneity, that authenticity, is what made it so powerful. In an age of carefully curated images, of Instagram posts and press releases and meticulously managed narratives, a moment of genuine emotion stands out. It reminds us that the royal family is not just an institution. It is a family. It is made up of people who grieve and love and remember, just like everyone else. Lewis's actions were not those of a prince performing his duty. They were those of a grandson honoring his grandmother. And that distinction is everything. The palace, for its part, has said nothing official about Lewis's visit. No statement, no confirmation, no denial. The silence is itself a form of acknowledgement, a recognition that some things are too personal to be explained, too meaningful to be reduced to a press release. But the silence also speaks to the family's ongoing struggle with Diana's memory. They have never quite known how to handle her. She was too complicated to be simply remembered, too beloved to be simply forgotten. And so they have walked a careful line, honoring her in some ways while remaining silent in others. Louis, in his innocence, found a way to break that silence. He did not ask for permission. He did not consult the press office. He simply acted. And in doing so, he reminded the world that Diana's legacy is not something that can be controlled or contained. It belongs to her grandchildren now, and they will carry it forward in their own way. On July 1st, 2026, an 8-year-old boy knelt at the feet of a bronze statue and pressed a flower into the soil. He did not know that the world was watching. He did not know that his small gesture would be reported in every newspaper, discussed on every news channel, shared by millions on social media. He did it because he wanted to, because he loved someone he had never met, because he understood, in the way that children sometimes do, that memory is not about grand gestures. It is about small, specific acts of love. The sunken garden will continue to be tended. The statue will continue to stand. The flowers will bloom and fade and bloom again. But on that Wednesday morning in July, something shifted. A child, acting on instinct, broke a silence that had lasted nearly 3 decades. He reminded the world that Diana was not just a princess, not just a symbol, not just a tragedy. She was a grandmother. She was loved. She was remembered. And in doing so, he reminded us of something else as well. That grief does not follow protocol. That love does not require permission. That memory, when it is real, will always find a way. The royal family has spent years trying to reconcile its past with its present. They have built statues and held memorials and issued statements. But none of it has ever quite captured what Diana meant. To the public, to her sons, to the grandchildren who would never know her. Louis did what no official tribute could. He honored her not because he was told to, but because he wanted to. And in that small, quiet moment, he did something that no amount of planning could have achieved. He made the world remember. And for a few minutes on a Wednesday morning, the world stood still. It remembered a young woman who walked into the royal family and changed it forever. It remembered a mother who loved her sons more than anything. It remembered a grandmother who never got to meet her grandchildren, but who, somehow, still found a way to hold them. Diana once wrote a letter to her butler, Paul Burrell, predicting that her sons would one day face great challenges and that they would need to hold on to each other. She could not have predicted that her grandsons would one day kneel at her statue, pressing flowers into the soil, keeping her memory alive in ways she could never have imagined. But perhaps she knew. Perhaps she always knew that love, real love, never truly dies. It just waits. It waits for someone young enough not to know that they aren't supposed to remember. Prince Louis remembered, and in doing so, he gave the entire country permission to do the same.